matin. J'espère que vous avez passé un bon.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you spent a great week at home.
J'espère que vous avez passé une bonne semaine dans vos circonscriptions. Chers collègues, nous sommes ici pour la réunion 128 du Comité permanent de la procédure et des affaires de la Chambre. Ce sera notre dernière réunion qui touchera au sujet de l'examen de la politique de prévention de la violence et du harcèlement au milieu de travail et l'intention des...
Traduction, ça fonctionne pas? Okay. We're just having an issue with the interpretation, so I'm just... Ça fonctionne maintenant? OK. Ça sent comme c'est...
It looks like it's fine.
Welcome to the 128th meeting of the Procedure and House Affairs. It's our final meeting to review the members of the House of Commons Workplace Harassment and Violence Prevention Policy. Friendly reminder and just piece of information for our witnesses, should you not be using the earpiece when plugged in, please just make sure that you have it placed on the sticker in front of you. Of course, if it's in your ear, nothing to worry about. And that's done in order to protect the well-being and safety of our translators. Colleagues, we know the drill. We've got three witnesses with us here today. So I would like to welcome from Equal Voice, Chi Nguyen, who is the Executive Director. From Heritage Skills Development Center, I'd like to welcome Madeline Wokidji. And from the Woman ACT or Woman Act, Harmy Mendoza, who is the Executive Director. So witnesses, we'll turn the floor over to you momentarily for introductory remarks of up to 5 minutes, and then we will move into our line of questioning. So with that, colleagues, we are going to begin. I'm not sure if there was a witness that had a preference of going first, but in the absence of that, then I would probably just ask Ms. Nguyen to start us off.
Thank you very much. My name is Chi Nguyen. I'm the Executive Director, as Mr. Carr has mentioned, of Equal Voice. We are a multi-partisan organization focused on electing women to all levels of government in this country for more than 20 years. We have been advocating for gender parity by working with the parties, by equipping women with the skills they need, and to help retain women in elected office. We have been doing some work in this space and researching these issues, and our research shows that with the increasing and shifting culture of harassment and violence in politics, there are real challenges in recruiting and supporting people to stay engaged. We're really delighted that you've been taking a look at your own internal practices and are considering how to continue to create the workplace environment that's safer for all involved. There are two pieces of work that we've been involved in that touch directly on your area of study at the moment. One of them is a piece of work on systemic change and how to create more gender-inclusive legislatures that we released in 2020. One of the three pillars in that work was a focus on safe and respectful workplaces. Following that work, we continue to explore and to try to better understand the sexual harassment policies that are at play in some of the provinces and territories. This report we actually released in this spring. It's called Combating Sexual Harassment in Canada's Legislative Assemblies. It's a page-turner, let me tell you. I would like to share a few of the findings from this work. There's 8 kind of key themes from it, but the things that are most relevant for your context today. First is that there are certain risks that increase the likelihood of sexual harassment in Canada's legislative assemblies. We know that we have underrepresentation in nearly all of those legislatures in this country, though we might see some changes in BC, and that's really exciting. And Quebec, of course, as well. So that underrepresentation means that there isn't the mass culture and the numbers of women to feel safe, and that is an area that we think we...
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order. Mr. Chair, I don't want to miss any... Yes.
Our witnesses, respectfully and totally understandable. I know you don't appear in front of committees very often. If we can just try to slow our pace a little bit, it just helps the translators, and in turn, that helps members. I will make sure to be flexible on your timing in order to accommodate that, but if you can just be conscious of it, that would be much appreciated. Merci. Thank you very much. Ms. Nguyen, there's about 3 minutes left.
Okay, my goodness. I'm going to try and stay focused and slow down. The other elements that we uncovered in our research, we did a fairly extensive study of qualitative and some quantitative data. That excessive alcohol consumption plays a role in the context of many legislatures. that the precarity of the nature of the work that happens in parliaments is something to note, as well as in addition to the hierarchical culture of this particular kind of workplace. We also know that sexual harassment and gendered behaviors impact different groups within the legislature differently. So different workers have varying degrees of power and differing employment arrangements and diverse norms. These characteristics mean that sexual harassment, along with other gendered behaviors, can manifest and affect different groups differently. Many research participants in our work also talked about the potential ramifications on their own career and mental health. With respect to the question of training during an onboarding process, one person responded, "I don't think we've ever received any training on anything. We were thrown into the deep end, and it's trial by fire." For those who had witnessed sexual harassment in legislative assemblies, they're concerned about the personal and professional ramifications of coming forward. And many such witnesses were also personally impacted by these behaviors. Some experienced trauma, fear for their careers, and worry about the safety and well-being in the workplace. And the last finding I want to point to is that many research participants who had used or considered using legislative policies found that they didn't always meet their needs. Anti-harassment policies that don't meaningfully support complainants can inadvertently cause harm to those who experience sexual harassment and protect those harassers. The policies can create a level of legitimacy to the efforts, but if there's not also a stream around prevention and mitigation, then we can create undue harms in other ways. So as part of this, when policies don't meet the needs of survivor victims, including mechanisms to ensure independence and clear and consistent communication with complainants, those who experience sexual harassment are at risk of further harm. I also want to speak briefly about some research work that we've done, polling opinion research to understand the views of Canadians on these issues. And I'll just note one particular stat that as we interview and polled young women about coming forward and thinking about a career in politics, we've seen an increase from 75 to 82% of women saying that they were concerned about online safety and harassment as issues if they thought about pursuing politics as an opportunity. We also want to note that many Canadians actually talked about harassment and physical safety as concerns from keeping them from stepping forward as potential candidates. So when you think about your long-term recruitment strategies as political parties and having strong, great candidates, it's part of the piece that I think we need to pay attention to. We regularly work with women and gender diverse people across the country. We've been running campaign schools now for the last several years. This past year, we've run campaign schools with more than 250 participants, and we know that we hear from them directly about their concerns about these issues. We talk about them, but that doesn't mean that that's the solution. People being aware of the challenge means that they're better equipped to face it, but it doesn't get to the prevention and the other work that needs to happen.
Ms. Nguyen, I'm afraid I'm going to have to end there. We've got
Okay.
a tight timeline today. However, there'll be lots of time for questioning, and hopefully you'll be able to get to the points that you wanted to there. Thank you very much. My apologies. Madame Wokaji, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good morning to distinguished members of the Standing Committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. So my name is Madeline Wokaji. I'm the Program Director at Heritage Skills Development Center, a nonprofit organization in Scarborough, Ontario. So HSDC was established in 1993 with a mission to promote the social, cultural, health, and economic integration of women, low-income, marginalized individuals, as well as newcomers. So through skills development, social, and capacity building programs, we work to support high-risk youth, low-income, disadvantaged individuals, families, and more. We do take pride in being a trusted service provider and have served the community for over 30 years. So today I would like to address a critical issue that impacts all workplaces across Canada, workplace harassment and violence. So as an organization deeply committed to providing safe, equitable, and respectful environments, we recognize the profound impacts of workplace harassment and violence can have on individuals, organizations, and society as a whole. Workplace harassment in all its forms, whether it be verbal, physical, sexual, emotional, microaggressions, or even cyberbullying, can have severe consequences for victims. This includes affecting one's psychological well-being, leading to anxiety, depression, and diminishing self-esteem. As we know, Victims may also struggle with chronic stress that can affect their overall productivity and well-being. So at HSDC, we do see the ripple effects of such trauma among the marginalized groups we serve, including women who already face multiple barriers and challenges in the workplace. And harassment can compound feelings of alienation, isolation, which delays their path to self-sufficiency. And beyond the personal toll, workplace harassment can also impact team dynamics, morale, and undermine organizational culture. And we also know that it can invite serious and legal financial repercussions. So employers and leaders are not only obligated by law to provide a safe working environment, but also to foster a culture that values inclusivity, respect, and dignity. So to address this, policies and proactive measures are essential. For example, at HSDC, we have implemented a comprehensive workplace violence and harassment program that not only meets the legal requirements, but goes beyond to foster an inclusive culture of respect. So this includes training for staff, volunteers, clear reporting mechanisms, and safety procedures, such as an emergency response plan. We believe that creating an environment where employees feel safe to speak up and are supported is the key to preventing and addressing harassment. In addition to this, we also have an upcoming project which will train our employer partners in Scarborough, Ontario on workplace harassment prevention strategies with a focus on microaggressions that women face in the workplace. So furthermore, a solution to the issue of workplace harassment lies not only in creating a policy, but also in regular training. An effective training program should educate House members and employees on recognizing all forms of harassment, understanding the impacts and how it impacts us in and outside of the workplace. So it's also important that all members and employees have an active role in maintaining a safe workplace. So we recommend an open door policy to the reporting of workplace harassment, as well as specific measures in place for taking immediate action, including conflict resolution strategies. And additional recommendation is cultural competency training for the House members, staff, and leadership. We do believe this is important, given the diverse members of the House of Commons who come from all walks of life. And cultural competency will help to improve understanding and sensitivity towards the diverse cultures, as well as behaviors or languages that could constitute as a workplace harassment. And just also wanted to add that it is vital to note age gaps and differences, generational differences within the members. Thus, as everyone brings their own unique lived experiences, everyone should be treated with the same dignity, respect, regardless of age, sex, or gender. It is not enough to simply react to incidents. We must create an environment where harassment and violence is not tolerated, and where employees and members feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. By fostering open communication, diversity, and inclusivity, we create workplaces that respect the dignity of all individuals, as failure to do this can have detrimental mental health impacts, and as well as our ability to thrive in the role as public servants. Members of Parliament are representatives of the people and also serve as our role models. Community members and youth look up to their MPs, including what they will do to address workplace harassment. And especially in this internet age and social media age, members do have an obligation to portray image as strong leaders and what it truly means to be Canadian, which is a respect for differences. So in conclusion, workplace harassment and violence has far-reaching effects on individuals, organizations, and our communities. By investing in prevention, education, accountability, we can create workplaces that are where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. So I urge the committee to consider the importance of strong policies, robust training programs, and a comprehensive support system to ensure that every Canadian workplace remains a space of dignity and respect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wokeji. Ms. Mendoza, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Minutes, great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harmy Mendoza. I am the Executive Director of Women Act. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today. Women Act is a charitable organization advancing gender equity by mobilizing research, policy, and education. Why is it essential to have a strong workplace harassment and violence prevention policy? Well, the pervasive nature of gender-based violence and harassment across all sectors is glaringly evident. Let me share my first statistic with you. 1 in 8 women reported that they have been sexually assaulted in work-related context at one point in their working lives. This rate is 4 times higher than what men experience. We cannot discuss this without acknowledging intersectionality. For example, women with disabilities face inappropriate sexualized behavior at a rate of 35% compared to 20% for those without disabilities. This is why at Women Act, we advocate for an intersectional and anti-oppressive approach. Moreover, let's talk about workplaces and productivity. What is the impact of harassment on productivity? Well, 55% of those who experience harassment reported decreased productivity. 70% missed work days, and 46% lost trust in their teams. To address such a concerning problem, it is crucial to implement trauma-informed and organization-wide practices. Now, your current policy. We were thrilled to see that the current policy includes harassment and violence prevention training for all members and employees to maintain a culture of respect. Thank you for that. This training curriculum should encompass bystander intervention training, including interactive exercises, role-playing scenarios, and industry-specific examples emphasizing empathy, allyship, and shared responsibility. Our newly launched Women Act in the Workplace initiative is a great example of how partnering with community organizations can help assess your workplace's needs and develop tailored training and resources to foster a survivor-centered and inclusive workplace culture. Now, there is also a need for the current policy to explicitly mention the need to respect the privacy and confidentiality of all persons involved, and a statement forbidding any reprisal against a complainant following a disclosure. Research shows that disclosures can be accompanied by feelings of shame, stigma, and fear of repercussions. In fact, studies tell us that survivors report that the outcome they most desire is confidentiality and to be shown concern. The current policy briefly mentions voluntary and confident support services through the Employee and Family Assistance Program. Complementary to these services, our research revealed the merits of counseling and peer support groups in healing and maintaining employment. Now, what are our recommendations? Well, it would be good that the provision of domestic violence leave, its eligibility criteria, and the request process should be readily available to all employees in a way that ensures the confidentiality and safety of the disclosure. Domestic violence leave should be explicitly mentioned in the policy and must be included as part of any related mandatory training and onboarding of employees to encourage survivors to feel safe and comfortable enough to disclose any instances of harassment and violence. Additionally, we recommend adding trauma-informed, gender-based analysis and anti-racist, anti-oppressive training to the required qualifications for investigators. This ensures that investigation procedures comply with the Code and the Canadian Human Rights Act, reducing the risk of trauma and re-victimization that may discourage disclosure and erode trust. And finally, implementing a zero-tolerance policy for sexual and gender-based workplace harassment is crucial for fostering a safe and inclusive work environment. Such policies protect employees from harmful behaviors and reinforce the organization's commitment to respect and dignity for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mendoza. Okay, witnesses, we are now going to move into our line of questioning, and we'll begin with Ms. Rimple-Garner, who will have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. In Canada, instances of criminal harassment are up 36% over the last decade, and that's just the incidents that are reported. Countless other times they're not, and that's true for any Canadian, but particularly for elected officials. It's extremely difficult for victims to get justice. That's because of a lot of different issues, gray areas in existing laws, bail issues, lack of education in the judiciary, and amongst law enforcement officials. To end this problem, it's been suggested that the government should enact legislation that would create a so-called digital restraining order. In this, a legal threshold similar to criminal harassment could be met if it was met, so not impinging on charter-protected speech. Courts could require internet service providers and other online platforms to both identify digital stalkers and require them to take measures to prevent these people from communicating with these victims. This would provide victims, including elected officials and the judiciary and law enforcement, with simple, easy-to-use tools to quickly end online criminal harassment. Would you recommend that the government enact such a measure, Ms. Wynne?
Thank you for the question. I feel like I would need to know a bit more context and specificity around how it was being rolled out. I think there are potentially great benefits to it, but I don't know that I can speak specifically to that.
But
approach.
you would agree that there needs to be more tools for law enforcement to end online criminal harassment?
I think tools as well on the enforcement side, but also on the prevention side, I think are part of the mix.
Thank you. The distribution of AI-generated so-called deep nudes are already having a negative, harassing impact on candidates and elected officials the world over. To date, Canada's federal government has failed to close a loophole in Canada's laws which prevent the non-consensual distribution of intimate images to include deep nudes. The Interparliamentary Union, in its 149 General Assembly last week, just passed a resolution regarding the impact of AI on democracy and human rights and called upon government to take action in this specific regard. Would you recommend that the government update Canada's criminal code sections regarding the non-distribution of intimate images to ensure that it's illegal to distribute highly realistic AI-generated deep nudes without consent? Thank you. Do you realize that there is a bill in front of Parliament that asks for both of these things to be done?
I'm aware that there's legislation moving through the system.
Do you think it would be helpful for the government, the federal government, to enact these measures prior to the next federal election?
I do think that signals to potential candidates.
No, but this is equal voice.
Yes.
These are nonpartisan issues, so I would just like your opinion as equal voice on whether or not the government should enact these measures prior to the next federal election.
I would welcome clear action in these spaces as soon as possible.
Thank you. Today is the 10-year anniversary of the shooting on Parliament Hill. Physical safety in our workplace is important as well. Would you recommend, Ms. Wynne, that the committee overseeing the renovation of Centre Block make specific recommendations to keep MPs physically safe in their workplace while allowing law-abiding citizens access to the grounds?
Yes, I think everyone who's serving on the Hill deserves to feel safe in their workplace.
Right now, if a candidate for federal office has to make expenditures during the writ period for security, like campaign office security systems, panic buttons, or hired security guards, these expenditures must be included in the spending cap for a campaign, which can disproportionately affect women. Would you recommend that Election Canada undertake a review to have certain types of eligible security expenses fall outside the election spending cap?
I think that would be a welcome review.
Thank you. The other thing that I'll mention is there have been instances where political parties have known about candidates who have been either under investigation for things like sexual harassment or criminal harassment and still allowed them to run, that they then ended up sitting in the legislature. Would you recommend that political parties review their candidate selection processes to ensure people that aren't under sexual harassment investigations would not be greenlit to run for their party?
I believe it would send a very clear signal to Canadians that folks under investigation for these allegations and need to be properly vetted.
About 90 seconds here.
Thank you, Chair. The other component that I think we'll be faced with in this committee in making recommendations is how to deal with MP to MP harassment. However, I do feel that this, the part of the problem, other colleagues have talked about enacting workplace measures to ensure that these types of harassment situations are taken seriously. They're inevitably politicized in Parliament. Would you recommend that any measures to deal with MP to MP conflict are handled by completely neutral arbiters, such as law enforcement or other officials outside of the party system, or even the parliamentary system, as it is under the role of the Speaker? The current Speaker has been accused of partisanship. Would you say that it is important, or recommend that it's important to have a neutral arbiter to eliminate politicization in workplace harassment issues in Parliament?
One of the recommendations from our review of the provincial and territorial legislatures as a best practice is an independent review place for that, and a stream of...
Here, would you suggest that that is... I would suggest that it's not the Speaker's office or the Whip's office. Would you concur with that assessment?
I
I'll just be blunt. I would feel completely like there's no way I would report something to the Speaker. So where would I go? So would you then, what I'm trying to say is equal voice. Would you suggest that it would benefit everybody if there was a truly neutral arbiter of any sort of dispute?
I'm going to confess that my scope of this particular piece of research didn't look at the federal context and where it should sit.
I'll go to Ms. Mendoza. Would you suggest
sorry, Ms.
a neutral
Rempel-Garner.
arbiter?
Just very, very quickly, Ms. Mendoza.
I
Michelle, if
need
you
more
want to repeat the
information to
question.
elaborate on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Ms. Romanato, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. And as my colleague, Ms. Rempel-Garner, said, today is the 10th anniversary of the attack on Parliament Hill, and for those who were there that day, it's a pretty tough day. With that, the reason we brought forward this study is currently there are two policies that deal with harassment of parliamentarians. One is the sexual harassment policy, and the other one is the harassment policy. Currently, the sexual harassment policy does cover sexual harassment between two members of Parliament, but the harassment policy does not. So currently, the harassment policy does cover harassment between an employee and a member of Parliament, or between employees, but it does not protect MPs from MP to MP harassment. So we're looking at that because obviously there is an impact. There is currently no mechanism for a member of Parliament who is going through harassment, whether it be psychological or I assume physical would be under the criminal code, but currently there is no mechanism for a member of Parliament who's going through such a difficult moment to get some relief. We, in our nature, the job that we do is very adversarial. And then we're not talking about debate in the House. What we're talking about is someone who is being bullied, someone who's being isolated, someone who's being intimidated, and so on and so forth. In that regard, I'd like to ask Equal Voice, have you done any research in terms of that? You mentioned a little bit about recruitment for people considering this line of work. Have you looked into any research that would identify this as an impediment for people considering this role?
Not specifically. One of the things that came out loud and clear in this review was that many harassment policies across the country are delivered in a way that are not necessarily plain language and easy to digest. And of course, going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction means that each context is going to have its own realities. And of course, where you sit within that legislature matters immensely. That piece of plain level information, clear plain language, and accessibility around the delivery of these harassment policies is critical for people to feel trust in them so that they can come forward safely. When we looked at Newfoundland's workplace harassment policy, we found it to be very comprehensive, and a lot of very strong practices there that are worth taking a look at.
We also heard from colleagues who came to present that the reason some colleagues are deciding not to reoffer, and we've seen this quite a lot in Quebec, of female politicians who've decided to not run again, especially at the municipal level. And we're losing great colleagues. We're losing great parliamentarians across this country due to harassment and intimidation, especially in the online world. We're seeing more and more the politics of agitation, as we call it. What would you recommend? This is something that's sort of outside the scope of what we can control, but what would you recommend in that regard? Quebec did pass legislation to increase fines for those who harass elected officials. Do you have any recommendations for us?
I think in the space around digital, it's there's work to be done to work with the social media providers to make sure that they're getting out in front of things sooner. The volume, I think, the role of bots in kind of creating the quantity of the harassment that's happening as well. These are all dimensions that I think we can find some mechanisms around. There's, in addition to this, I think what you're missing is the positive feedback loops. Thank you for the service that you do every day, every single one of you. And you need to hear from many of us who believe strongly that you should be able to come to work safely and be protected in your digital space. And that's really critical. So I think part of this is, a news story that's a good news story about the work that is positive that's coming out of legislatures and governments across this country.
So at the end of the last, I won't say the session, we're still in the same session. At the end of June, some parliamentarians around this table decided to bring forward a parliamentary pledge. And Ms. Matheson is spearheading that with a fellow senator to have parliamentarians from across all parties and in both the House and the Senate to make a pledge that comes out of I believe it was in Halton, a commitment to call it out and to stand shoulder to shoulder when they witness somebody going through an episode of harassment, or to stand by and to call out the bad behavior. We're hopeful that with that movement, more and more people will recognize, we're all very, very busy, but recognize when someone's in the middle of a situation and step forward and to say this is not acceptable behavior in the absence of a policy change. Would you have any other recommendations for us as well? And with that regard, I'll ask Ms. Mendoza.
I will definitely elaborate and on that. Absolutely. And that's why we talk about bystander intervention. Research tells us that it's not that people don't care. It's that they often don't know what to do or how to respond. And so having proper mechanisms that are clearly available to people is very important. It's crucial, as well as the training to be able to respond. First, to identify and to respond to it and know that you're doing the right thing. It's a little bit, I always compare it with CPR training. You know how we get trained every year, just like you have your training in your policy and you're supposed to repeat it every year. But the training has to be really around what to do when I see it. So absolutely, I will definitely second that. And to your question earlier, I believe there should be a mechanism. I believe there should be a mechanism so that everybody feels safe, but it also is clear what to do when they are experiencing harassment. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Madame Gaudreau, la parole à vous pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Gaudreau, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, first, I want to sincerely thank you for being here. Everybody has their earpieces in. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Just a moment, please.
Have your earpieces in front of you? Okay, so what you want to do is there's a little plug-in on the side. I'll try to show you right here. So you just plug it in, and then the top 2 arrows on the big device here, if you switch to English, assuming that's what you want, so it'll say ENG, and then the volume control is on the bottom. So we'll just give you a moment.
Juste vous assurer que le volume.
Just make sure that the volume is loud enough so that you can hear us.
Thumbs up that you can hear it's working. Okay, Madame Gaudreau, on va commencer.
Ms. Gaudreau, we're going to start again. So your 6 minutes are starting now. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'll start again. I want to thank you, sincerely thank you, for being here this morning to tell us about, first, your reports and your statistics. So first, I would appreciate it if you could table the documents you talked to us about, you told us about, because we could talk about it for hours. Here, as my colleague mentioned earlier, what we want is a modernization of the harassment policy among and between MPs. I don't know if you've seen or heard or seen on TV what we have at question period. It's different from what we have elsewhere. Have you compared it? In Quebec, at the National Assembly, what we have, there's no yelling, there's no banging on desks. It's healthy. It's respectful. I want to hear first, and then I'll have other questions, of what you think of the completely ridiculous climate. That's what I call it, that we have here. What do you think of us? How it's going?
I want to note that Prince Edward Island actually has anti-heckling legislation in place in their legislature. It does not mean that behavior is always the tone of parliamentary approach that one might desire. I have spent a bit of time in the north and seen how consensus governments comport themselves, and it's a different perspective. I also want to note, though, that much of the very important work that happens at the House of Commons happens in committees, and there is great place for great collaboration, really strong recommendations, and so because the media spotlight isn't on this work, we are losing out on the storyline of really thoughtful legislative expertise, and so. Yes, it might be helpful to have a different approach in question period, but we also know that it's sometimes a bit of theater.
Yes, I wanted to second that. I absolutely do agree that there should be maybe a review of certain guidelines, right, for members of parliament and behavior in legislature. There's a lot of work to be done, and with the changing environment as things keep changing, particularly we talked about even cyberbullying, online harassment with the, as you know, everything is now posted online. I think it's mindful, as I mentioned even earlier in my speech, as members of parliament are role models and have to portray themselves in a manner that, you know, the community, you know, would respect and the youth will look up to, especially young people that are looking to be in parliament. So I think it's something to constantly think about, the way the policies and just behaviors that are acceptable or not acceptable among peers in the members of parliament.
Yes, thank you for the question. I wasn't impressed. I have watched a few times, especially when there is legislation that is important for the line of work I do, and it did seem, I guess for lack of a better word, a bit too much for me. I was expecting a different type of behavior for those who are representing our country and do this important work.
Je vous pose une question.
I'll ask you a question. Have you had the opportunity to watch the documentary Je vous salue salope is the French title. It's a documentary on digital misogyny. I encourage you to watch it, because every time I talk to others in other countries, women and groups representing women, even overseas, really showcase this documentary. It'll really give you a clear idea and reflect what you were saying. If our policy for behaviors between MPs and among MPs also has a process for calling out and reporting behavior that is unacceptable, do you think it will be one of the first steps to reduce the level of animosity or lack of respect that we have here in the House of Commons?
About 60 seconds left in this line, so whoever responds, please be mindful of that. Thank you.
I do believe that there should be stronger procedures in terms of MP to MP interaction, and as I said, language and behaviors that are acceptable or unacceptable, whether it's in the House or outside of the House, online. And I do believe stronger measures and maybe potential consequences will help to deter certain behaviors. And I think that would be a great step into just having more respect and treating everyone the same, regardless of age, regardless of gender, and respecting everyone's opinion. As I mentioned earlier, we all come from different, the members come from all different walks of life, and just being respectful of that. So I think with the training and just a revision of certain policies will help to, at least have a little bit of a deterrence for certain members of parliament in terms of, communication and behaviors, in the House. Thank you.
Merci. Merci, Madame Gaudreau.
Thank you, Ms. Gaudreau.
And the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you as well to the witnesses for appearing before this important study today. I, as a staff person who worked on the Hill 10 years ago, which is very strange to me to say, I do want to acknowledge that 10-year anniversary of the death of Nathan Cirillo and the impact it had on us here. I wanted to ask, one of the reasons why I did, and we spoke about the pledge already a little bit, but one of the reasons why I thought about bringing that forward here, it concerns me that we can have a lot, and we should have, rules and regulations that are clear, that are well communicated. As you said, I understand that entirely, but it doesn't necessarily get to what is needed, and so I thought that the pledge would be more of a peer pressure. That second that a member, when they sign it, they think twice. How effective do you feel that can be if we all take that second in terms of that peer pressure, and we're consistently talking about it here on the Hill? All of you, any of you?
Okay. I think it would be very effective. And you are right. And I think one of us spoke about that in terms of prevention, in terms of preparing ourselves to learn about that, learn to recognize the sign, speak about it. I talk about bystander intervention. I talk about role playing. And I also talk about one research we undertook at Women Act, where on top of your supports through the different services that you have, peer support is very important, because survivors have told us that the best outcome when it comes to bringing forward a complaint is not only confidentiality, but to feel safe. And I think the peer support is very important when it comes to the response of this key issue. So I would highlight it as an important part. We talk about all of the different legislation, all of the different really good work that you are doing, but or restraining orders, they are tools. But that's it. We're not going to solve it with that alone. We need prevention, we need training, we need to do it, everyone, everywhere.
To build off of that, having sat on Status of Women Committee, on National Defense, we saw at the Veterans Affairs Committee, they were discussing military sexual trauma and the impacts on veterans. We soon will hopefully be dealing with a bill that tries to change some of the rules around military sexual trauma. I have asked for additional, and some of those committees have received trauma-informed GBA plus training, so that when witnesses come forward, there aren't additional re-traumatizations. That there's an understanding there, but it strikes me that all members need to receive that. What would you say about that in terms of those proactive tools?
Everyone, everywhere. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We all need to be aware of how trauma impact how we don't want to re-traumatize by implementing policies in a way that is not appropriate. The policies will hopefully take you to one step further, but you need to make sure that all the frameworks are properly applied to the procedures to be able to not re-traumatize people or lose trust or lose really important politicians, women who could be at the front. And so when you talk about different sectors, and that's actually part of the work we have been doing at Women Act. We have been going out and knocking at different doors from different sectors that are, I'm going to call the non-social services sector, just for lack of, I don't want to go specifically, but yes, especially those who are male-dominated workplaces. We need to start having conversations about this problem that we all have. And the statistics are there. It's very clear that there is a problem, that it exists. It continues to exist. And we can only hope to eliminate it if we work from different areas of the spectrum. Legislation, the work that you do is very important, but it's also the other areas of work are as crucial and as critical. And I'm just going to end by speaking about something that we talk a lot at our end. It's called climate assessments. And what that means is that when we go and call and knock on different sectors' doors, and or sometimes they actually come and knock at our door and say, I think we have an issue here. And we go, okay, how did you know? Well, there was this complaint. Okay, what else did you know? What else is happening in your organization? And we propose undertaking climate assessments. Why? Because that will give you a better sense of what is the issue, how big is the issue, and to be able to tailor interventions that are more applicable to that particular sector. And that means, yes, what language do they use? You talk about the military. There's this whole rules of engagements that they talk about. How does that intersect or in any way align to anti-oppressive training? Maybe not at all, but I think that it's important to start having those conversations and what are the areas that we could actually align to some extent to recognize that there is an issue here. And for us, people like me that work in this sector, it's about women dying every day in Canada and the context of gender-based violence and IPV and women experiencing workplace harassment.
Thank you, Madame Matheson. Madame Viens, la parole à vous pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. Oh, I'll give you time to get your earpieces in.
Alors, merci.
Thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here with us. I'd like to reassure you also with regard to the ability parliamentarians have to work together. Whatever our party is, it's not a huge secret. Safety is something that's very important to my party. Before arriving here at this parliament, I was at the Quebec Parliament. I finished my career as 15-year career there as Minister of Labour. And as a Minister of Labour, I feel like I left an important legacy through all the changes I made to working standards. I made changes, for example, to time. We're talking a lot about doing right now, during a workplace, but there's also what happens afterwards. We need to talk about that too. In Quebec, there were 3 months. You were given 3 months, whether you were an MLA, an employee, or former employee. You had 3 months. It was clear to me, because around us we all have people or cases of violence or harassment at work that show that 3 months is not enough. It's clearly not enough to recover, because people, before realizing what happened, to understand what happened and understand what's happening within them, well, it takes some time. When I arrived here, Well, in Quebec, we changed the law. We changed it from 3 months to 2 years of time to recover. What I hear about that, you know what, Ms. Vien? 2 years is pretty good. People have the time to take the steps to fix the situation, to recover. There's nothing here in Ottawa. Over the past few years, we've allowed a previous employee who had gotten nothing over since 2021 to have 3 months. Oh, rather, this time period is for reporting what happened. 3 months to report what happened. Bill 370, Ms. Mendoza, it looks like you know what it is. I'm glad to see that. Bill 370 states that, you know what, we'll move from 3 months to 2 years to report that for former employees to report incidents. That will allow them to be able to do so. And what I want to get to, I want to get back to what you said, Ms. Mendoza. Yes, there are times when we really work well together because that bill is probably going to be approved by all parliamentarians. And that's an initiative of the Conservative Party. Do you think that 2 years to report, that 2 years that we'll be able to provide, if God willing, as we say, where I'm from, is that enough?
Counts.
You have 60 seconds.
Yes, I would agree. I think the more time we can provide to those who are experiencing to report, the better. Absolutely.
Can I just hot pursuit? We recommend that there are not timelines and that people can come forward well past, because sometimes you are too traumatized to come forward. It is not the right professional moment for you to come forward. And so to be able to seek remedies and to work through the process to be able to do that, we recommend not having time limits.
I would also agree with that. So women are already faced with tremendous barriers in the workplace, whether it's in terms of, rising up in, or let's say, for example, a new MP who's just got into their career. So I think having a barrier to having all the barriers in the workplace and then having a short time frame, it might not necessarily be a conducive time for them to report. And also we talk about who they're reporting to, which was mentioned as well earlier. So who they're reporting to also has a big role in this, right? So if there's a form of intimidation or fear of reprisal, it may not necessarily come out. It might be 4 years later or 5 years later before they're able to speak out about their trauma. So we do recommend a little bit longer time and flexibility in the harassment reporting procedures.
Merci, Madame Vien. Madame Fortier, 5 minutes.
Merci. Ms. Fortier, 5 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Vien. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, I'll give you time for, you kept your earpieces on. Great. I'll be able to continue in French then. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning. I think this is a great conversation. I really like what I'm hearing from MP Vien, because I think that's very important to have that kind of mechanism put in place. I remember that where I was 10 years ago, I was at the Collège de la Cité, 10 kilometers from here, and we were in lockdown during that situation, and it's bringing back some memories. So
remercier ma collègue Mathison et toute l'équipe là, la sénatrice.
I'd also like to thank all the members. I know that we had the AMA's member. She wanted us to go forward with the parliamentary commitment. So for us, it was extremely important to sign this pledge. I would like to go on with the discussion, Mrs. William, concerning the research you are doing at Equal Voice. We talk a lot about recruitment.
now, if you look at the retention aspect, I'll admit that as an MP, as an elected member, I may have a lot of questions as an MP. But now, ensuring that I'll feel like staying, do you have any research that shows how to encourage women, not just MPs, but other women at other political levels, how to help them want to stay in politics?
So I spent the day on Saturday having conversations about this at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, looking at retention and recruitment, particularly of diverse candidates. I think the piece that's really compelling for women is to be reminded over and over again of the powerful work that you're able to do, and that the reason that you're here is because you see an opportunity for change and you want to contribute to that. Every time we've spoken to a woman in office, governing anywhere from every political party, they talk about their achievements, and despite all of the burdens and the challenges, they have things to be very proud of. And so that's absolutely critical to reminding people of why they're here in service, and that's, I think, how we shift the narrative to help women stay. And men. We need great people doing the phenomenal work that you do. It's thankless, and we appreciate it, and that's the huge piece of this work, is to be reminded and to share it with each other. And those success stories are what are going to continue to propel your efforts forward.
On parlait entre autres, de ce qui se passe.
We mentioned what's happening not just at the federal level, but at the provincial and territorial levels. Do you also look at what's happening at the municipal level? I saw Entre Élus, which is just across the way in Gatineau, or rather what happened between elected members, even at the municipal level. There were all kinds of reasons why the elected mayor, a woman, left. And I know that other female mayors and others also have faced issues. We've heard a lot about that, and I imagine it's the same thing elsewhere in Canada. Did you hear about that? And do you have any ideas that would help us move forward with all our work and help what's happening at the municipal level also?
It's a great question. I think that it's really critical, again, another woman mayor was then elected, right? So there are still women who are prepared to come forward. And so I think it's about the kind of peer support networks and ways in which we can resource the opportunities around safety. I know that for some communities, having caucuses of community members that look more like them allow them to kind of unpack the additional kind of intersectional barriers that some elected officials face or carry with them. So I think that's really important work as well. So creating those safe spaces for parliamentarians formally and informally to be able to connect and to talk through things that are really tough, I think are really important mechanisms that could help in this area.
Merci. Puis, Madame Mendoza, tantôt, vous...
Thank you. And Ms. Mendoza, earlier you talked about mechanisms that needed to contain certain principles. Could you continue to develop the idea of what kind of framework we'd have to have in this kind of context so that we don't forget how we're going to develop that mechanism? Are there basic criteria or a framework that we absolutely need to include on paper so that we can have the best mechanism in place for this study here?
Just quite rapidly. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Well, I guess I have a couple of words in terms of frameworks. Intersectionality, it's one important word, and I speak about I talk about an example on that. An anti-oppressive approach, and please don't forget that your training needs to include role playings and bystander interventions. And I would strongly encourage you to work with community organizations to support that. They are the experts. They do this work every day, and I think they are aware of the trends that we're facing or we're seeing in our communities.
Merci, Madame Fortier. Madame Gaudreau, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Fortier. Ms. Gaudreau, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate all of your comments. Here's my question. In a democracy, we represent the people who elected us and others, our constituencies. In the Scandinavian countries, in Quebec, elsewhere, for all practical purposes, we have parity. I see further than that representativeness of the local population. Now, do you think, if we fix the MP to MP issue and so on, but if you're a minority and you're going through discrimination and so on, do you think that having parity or representativeness of the whole population would change our democracy and how we act?
I would say, our population is definitely changing in terms of diverse individuals and even representative in Parliament as well. And I do believe as things change, with Canada is a country very accepting of immigrants from all places, and many have come here and been able to become members of Parliament and even higher, right? So I think with the changes, definitely we do think. With the changes in the representatives as well as with the appropriate training, I also mentioned earlier cultural sensitivity, cultural competency training as a recommendation. And the reason being this training will be able to, create a better understanding of the different diverse cultures that do come to be part of the members of the House of Commons. And with this kind of training and understanding different languages, different behaviors as that people bring, that would also, create a better working environment.
C'est de la musique à mes oreilles. J'aime entendre parce
That's music to my ears. I'd like to hear what you have to say, because the rest of you, because I just have 30 seconds left.
Yes, we want our parliaments to look like our communities. So by seeing more diversity, more women represented, people with different lived experiences around the table, it will strengthen our democracy. We know that diversity in business creates better business outcomes. That diversity in thinking will also help.
Absolutely, yes.
Merci, Madame Gaudreau.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaudreau.
Ms. Matheson, 2.5 minutes.
I have way more than 2.5 minutes worth of questions, so I'll try and put them together. The first I wanted to ask specifically for Equal Voice in that comparison of legislatures that you did, I am also worried about the impacts that this level of hate has towards the people who serve within them, not just the elected officials, but those. And I'm wondering if you surveyed people who work within those institutions and the impacts of harassment and what they're seeing in terms of that hate coming forward on them. But I would also like to talk, if you can, about. I mean, we're seized in this Parliament about foreign interference, the roles of foreign governments for sure in terms of disinformation, that fueling of hate, what that all leads to. We're certainly seeing that internally, nationally, and wondering what certain groups, what their end goal is, how that actually, especially for the extreme right, what their objective is to undermine our democracy in that way.
Question around whether or not we also surveyed staffers and folks who aren't elected. Yes, the survey also included that in our data, so we will make sure that the committee has a copy of that report so you can dive more deeply. The question around the place of hate in this work, I think, is in all of this work for everyone, is just it's making the conditions a bit more challenging, and certainly many people just look at this work and say, why on earth would I sign up for this?
Are there benefits though for certain groups to undermine democratic institutions? What does that look like?
I think there are from within the legislatures itself.
Yes.
I don't know that I can speak to the agendas of those folks.
I don't know if the other witnesses want to try and tackle it.
Sorry, was it related to members of the legislative and undermining?
It can be. There are certain movements in terms of that. The undermining of a democratic institution, in terms of disinformation, in terms of that hate to push people out. Do you think that there's an agenda there?
Very, very quickly, please.
There could be. People come from all walks of lives, and some people have, whether it's personal, cultural beliefs, or however, we do have to recognize this is Canada, and we are all governed by our Charter of Rights and Freedom, and we do have the freedom of expression. However, we definitely cannot undermine the country we're in, and so I think it's just important to be mindful of that. I think there could be individuals with certain agendas, but I'm not too sure as to what those agendas could be, but we do have to be mindful regardless of the country we're in and be respectful of everyone and not undermine the democratic process.
Thanks very much, Ms. Matheson. Ms. Rempel-Garner, 5 minutes.
Colleagues, I don't come to this committee often, so I'm going to use this time to give you my recommendations as an expert in this field, having been here a hot minute. You guys are going to want to recommend to put the MP to MP harassment within the existing code, but we all know the reality of what's going to happen with that. It's going to be politically weaponized. Even if it goes through House of Commons administration, I know many of you, if we had a conservative speaker, wouldn't feel comfortable putting it through there. We've seen leaks happen through that process, so it's just not going to work. Like, let's be realistic. And let's think about what the impact of that would be. My colleague, Mr. Gerritsen, and I, we've had some pretty rock'em sock'em robot conversations on Twitter. I know I blocked him on Twitter. That doesn't mean I don't respect him as a colleague. But what would happen if I put in a harassment complaint against him? All of a sudden, he is going to be tried in the court of public opinion, which I might like. I mean, that sounds really great. It's a cheap political win, but it goes against the principles of good HR management, right? So we can't do this. Like, let's be realistic. That's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that given the change in gender composition of Parliament, that we shouldn't have something, okay? So this is what I would suggest. Number one, don't put anything in this report that allows for the weaponization of HR. Don't do that. And we all know that that's going to happen. You know, with everything that's, like, credit to our witnesses, they don't live in our world. They just don't. And the roles, I used to manage a team of 40 staff in a unionized environment. That world doesn't apply here, right? Because of political weaponization. So what do? I think that this is a question of privilege. I have the right to work in a workplace without harassment. So this is what I would suggest. First of all, extend EAP services to include a mechanism to just de-escalate tension, particularly within caucuses. Liberal Party, you're about to go through a leadership race. That is an ugly time. It is an ugly time within a party. You need to have a process to de-escalate tensions. Number two, make it a violation of privilege. Change the standing order so that if somebody uses an EIP process to de-escalate tension and they leak it to the media, that there's some sort of House censure for that. Make it absolutely sacrosanct to not leak this stuff to the media because it would be done in good faith. Number three, make sure that there's training for party whips, okay? So we all understand that party whips are in a difficult situation because they have to maintain votes and adherence to party standards, but at the same time, they're also managing HR in an environment where HR law doesn't apply. So perhaps there could be some training or some processes for that. I only have 5 minutes, so I won't suggest what that looks like. But things like, I would say the same goes for caucus chairs. Caucus chairs should be independent from the center of a party. There should be rules in caucus meeting for party leadership, as well as caucus chairs, on how to manage that interaction in a caucus meeting so that you don't have people yelling at each other or berating each other. And again, at the end of the day, there should also be some sort of process for vexatious complaints. So if I go after my colleague, Mr. Gerritsen, with some sort of accusation and it's completely bunk, and we've seen this happen in this place. We've seen it, right? Reputations have been destroyed, right? Lives have been destroyed. What does that mean? There should be some sort of process to discourage that. So as much as, like, I agree, like, the notion of the pledge that has been made, I mean, that's nice, but what we really need here is some sort of process that relates to the privilege of being able to work in a workplace without any sort of harassment that is not going to be weaponized for political gain, which an MP to MP harassment absolutely will be. It will absolutely be weaponized. So don't do that. Do something smarter, and that is my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rempel-Garner, thank you for providing some productive and interesting guidance to the committee. Ms. Romanado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank my colleague for those excellent recommendations. I think, in addition to that, I would include in the current policy the reference to harassment between members of Parliament so that it is specific that this is unacceptable behavior. Already in the appendix, it has examples of behaviors that are considered unacceptable. I like the idea, the recommendation about training. I do agree with the bystander training, which is sort of a bit, the pledge is in addition to, we need stronger mechanisms here in the House for that. I agree with the fact that I don't think it should be the Speaker who would be the arbitrator of complaints with respect to sexual harassment. And the reason why, as my colleague mentioned, whoever is in the chair is also a member of a political party. And so already we have a chief human resources officer who would look at complaints of sexual harassment and or harassment between MPs and employees or between employees. So this person's already trained and an expert in that field in terms of human resources to go through an EAP process, go through a mediation process, and so on and so forth. So I would say similar to what we're trying to do with C-66, the military justice system, where we're taking out complaints outside of, we don't want the military to investigate itself, right, in terms of cases. So similar to that, we don't think that political parties should be investigating themselves. But in terms of any other recommendations that you would have for us, it's been 10 long years that a report came out saying that we need to get this loophole closed. Do you have any additional recommendations for us to make sure that this gets done once and for all?
I feel that I'll reiterate. I feel like we need to make sure this is the training is implemented, embedded. We need to make sure that it's clear that people feel less scared to go through a process, especially as a complainant, right? That I have certain venues and it's clear to me what are my venues to forward. I think that I will reiterate an anti-oppressive framework. Intersectionality is also important to include. And so I think those are important areas to include. And I did provide my speech as to, there are other venues like the domestic leave is not in your current policy as well. So that's also an important area that it would be good to include there as well. So yeah, I don't have any other suggestions. I don't know if my colleagues have.
I think a piece around data and evaluation, I'm not sure if that's baked into the approach right now. That's disaggregated so that you can start to identify trends about complainants and what's coming forward. Would be helpful, and also some of that kind of annual deep survey work of whether people are familiar with the policies, where the education and training is coming from, I think would also be useful in the rollout and making sure that that information is readily available for people.
And I would add even just expanding the scope in terms of what constitutes as a form of harassment. So, for example, we think about microaggressions that could be used and how that can impact folks, as well as conflict resolution training. So when these matters, as part of the new policy and training, so conflict resolution, how MPs can handle issues within them, between them, and then the training should also have a trauma-informed lens with a gender-based analysis and just to perspective in the training. And I think we've also talked about bystander intervention and peer support and things like that. That would be really helpful to ensure that this is effective. And also an open door policy. We talked about not having maybe a term limit, just open door policy to these complaints, as well as a neutral party to be able to resolve matters.
Thank you very much, Ms. Romanado. Well, thank you very much to our witnesses for being here. Your testimony certainly adds important insight to our work, so thank you again. Colleagues, momentarily we will suspend, give everyone a couple of minutes to just reset. Any folks that are not with staff or members of Parliament, you'll need to leave the room as we're going to be heading in camera. Colleagues, we have some committee business to attend to. I don't anticipate it's going to take us too long, although I may regret having just said that. But nonetheless, we will be back in just a few moments. So we're suspending briefly.
you.